Before we begin, if you love true stories that send chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe to our channel, to pause the video, and leave a comment below. Are you ready for your next nightmare?
I was living in an old apartment. Nothing fancy, just cheap enough for me to afford on my own. That was the only reason I stayed there.
It had its fair share of problems, but I put up with them. That night started out like any other. After work, I got home earlier than usual, about 2 hours ahead of schedule. I warmed up some leftovers and sat down on the couch to unwind with some TV. Exhaustion was already setting in, and the dim lighting mixed with the soft background noise made it worse. I barely lasted an hour before I gave in, turned off the television, and went straight to bed. Within minutes, I was fast asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. A noise had pulled me out of my sleep, a creaking sound. My apartment was old, so it wasn't unusual for it to make noises, especially when the wind picked up. But something felt off. I didn't remember it being windy that night. The sound came again, steady and rhythmic. A single creak, then a pause. Another creak, then silence. It wasn't random, it was moving. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just the building settling, I told myself. But deep down, I already knew better. I slowly pushed open my bedroom door. The hallway stretched out before me, leading to the front door, with the kitchen on one side and the living room on the other. I listened. The sound was coming from the left. And then I realized something chilling. The creaks were traveling across the floor. My breath caught as I noticed it growing louder. Before I could even react, a shadowy figure emerged at the far end of the hallway. I froze, my entire body locked up in terror. The man didn't look at me. He just walked, slow, deliberate steps, staring straight ahead. Adrenaline kicked in, and I instinctively pulled back, slipping into my bedroom without shutting the door. I couldn't risk making a noise. The creaks persisted, each one louder and more unsettling than the last. My ears strained to catch every sound, every movement. I could hear the distinct noise of cabinets being opened and closed in the kitchen, the sharp clatter of dishes and utensils echoing through the silent apartment. Footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth. My mind raced, a whirlwind of panic and confusion. How had he gotten in? The doors were locked, the windows secured, or so I had thought. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of the situation, but no explanation came. Then, just as I had feared, his shadow shifted. It was faint at first, barely visible under the crack of my bedroom door, but it grew larger, darker, more defined. He was near the hallway again, his presence looming closer with every passing second. I held my breath, my body tense, bracing myself for the inevitable. I expected him to turn toward my room, to push open the door and reveal himself. But he didn't. Instead, he just kept walking, his footsteps steady and unhurried, passing by my door once more. The relief was fleeting, replaced by a deeper, more paralyzing fear. What was he doing? Why was he here? The soft sound of weight settling into my couch broke the silence, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I texted 911, my message brief and frantic. I was too scared to call, too afraid that even the slightest sound would betray my presence. The thought of him hearing me, of him knowing I was there, was unbearable. For what felt like an eternity, I sat frozen in the darkness, every second stretching into an agonizing minute. The knowledge that a stranger was sitting in my living room just a few feet away was almost too much to bear. He wasn't taking anything. He wasn't searching through my belongings or rifling through drawers. He was just waiting. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, cold and unrelenting. Was he waiting for me to come out? Was he biding his time, planning his next move? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Then my phone buzzed, the vibration startling me out of my thoughts. The police were in the building. The message was brief, but it was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I bolted. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, propelling me down the hall toward the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, but I managed to twist it open just as the officers stormed in. Their presence was a blur of motion and noise, a chaotic symphony of shouts and heavy footsteps. They tackled the man before he even had time to react, pinning him to the ground with practiced efficiency. I stood there, breathless and trembling, as the scene unfolded before me. I'd never seen him before in my life. His face was unfamiliar, his motives unknown. Later, I learned that he had climbed up the side of the building to reach my balcony. The sliding door hadn't been locked, a simple oversight that had allowed him to slip inside unnoticed. He could have chosen any apartment, any target, but he had chosen mine. Why? The question lingered, unanswered and unsettling. When questioned, he insisted he was just trying to rob a place, but he had stolen nothing. He wasn't even carrying a bag, wasn't holding any tools or weapons. And the most unsettling part? He had been sitting on my couch, waiting. For what? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my getting home early had something to do with this. Had he been expecting my usual schedule? Had he thought I wasn't home yet? The idea that he might have been watching me, studying my routines, was chilling. And if I hadn't woken up, what would have happened then? The question haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind long after the police had left, and the apartment was quiet once more. I didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty was the most terrifying part of all. The thought of what could have been, of what might have happened if I had been just a little later, or if I hadn't heard the creaks, was enough to keep me awake at night. I don't know what his intentions were, and I don't know why he chose me. But the not knowing, that's what haunts me the most. I had booked a remote cabin in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee for a week of solitude. The cabin was tucked away in a dense forest, miles from the nearest town, and only reachable by a narrow, unpaved road that twisted through the trees. It was early December, and a light blanket of snow had settled over the landscape, just enough to make everything look serene, but not enough to make travel difficult. The first couple of days were perfect, quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed. Then, on the third evening, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. In fact, I hadn't seen another person since I arrived. There was no peephole or window near the door, so the only way to see who it was to open it. Standing there was a man, dressed in a heavy black coat and a woolen scarf. His face was pale, his nose red from the cold, and snowflakes clung to his shoulders. He looked like he had been out in the elements for a while. "Hi, sorry to bother you," he said with a faint smile. "I think I took a wrong turn. Could you point me toward the main road?" Something about the situation felt off. Walking all the way out here, in this weather. And how had he even gotten this far without a car? Sure, I said, hesitating. "Just follow this road back the way you came, and you'll hit the main trail. Turn left, and it'll take you to the highway." He nodded, still smiling, but didn't move. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me. The silence stretched, making my skin crawl. "All right, take care," I added, closing the door. Through the wood, I heard his boots crunch on the snow as he walked away. I waited a moment, listening, before stepping back. Something about that interaction left me uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. Hours passed, and as night fell, the snowfall grew heavier. I went to check the weather and pulled back the curtains of the back window. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow. Not fresh, but not completely covered either. They looped around the side of the cabin. A chill ran through me, unrelated to the cold. Had he been walking around before knocking? Scoping out the place? The longer I stared at the tracks, the more unsettled I felt. The sun had set, and the shadows from the trees made it impossible to see beyond the glow of the porch light. I closed the curtains and locked every door and window before retreating to the bedroom. I turned on my laptop, trying to distract myself, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I started dozing off, until a knock at the door jolted me awake. My heart raced as I sat up, frozen. "Hey, it's me again," a voice called from outside. "Still lost? It's freezing out here. Can you help me?" It was him. My blood turned to ice. Why was he still here? I crept to the bedroom door and listened. The knocking continued, slow and deliberate. I checked my phone. Barely any signal, but enough to dial 911. The dispatcher said a patrol car was about 15 minutes away. I whispered a thank you and hung up, trying not to make a sound. And then, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. He hadn't walked away. He was still out there. My breath caught in my throat. I had to know where he was. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept to the front window and peeled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The footprints led up to the porch, but none led away. My stomach churned. My pulse pounded in my ears. He had to still be standing there, just beyond the door. I clutched my phone, ready to call 911 again, when something heavy landed on the roof. A loud thud directly above me. My heart nearly stopped. He wasn't in front of the door anymore. He was on the roof. I scrambled backward, locking myself in the bedroom. The seconds dragged like hours as I waited, every muscle tensed for another sound. Then, another thud. Closer. Was he trying to find a way in? Or had he already found one, slipping through some unseen gap, waiting for the right moment? My pulse hammered as I strained to hear anything over the pounding of my heart. The wail of sirens cut through the silence, sharp and sudden. Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in shifting hues. My legs felt weak with relief, and I started toward the door, reaching for the handle when the shouting began. "Get down, now!" The command rang out, firm and unyielding, followed by the chaos of bodies colliding. A heavy scuffle, the sound of boots on frozen ground. Then a sudden sickening crash. Something or someone had hit the ground hard. I pressed my back against the wall, listening to the furious struggle outside, fists slamming, cuffs snapping shut. The voices of the officers cut through the night, firm but tense. It turned out he had never left after that first knock. He had been lurking somewhere in the darkness, crouched just out of sight, biding his time. And at some chilling moment in the dead of night, he had climbed the side of the cabin and crept onto the roof. Had he been watching me through the windows? Was he waiting for the lights to go out? Maybe he was hoping I would unlock the door, step outside, give him an opening. Maybe he had an entirely different plan, one I would never know. The police hauled him away for trespassing, but he never said a word, never explained himself, never revealed what he had wanted. Maybe he thought silence was more unnerving. Maybe he was right. All I knew was that for the better part of a day he had been there, lurking, studying me, choosing his moment.
And the realization that he had been watching me, that he had been planning something, I would never shake that. That thought alone was enough to haunt me forever.